I spent my whole life giving love, time, money, pieces of myself until one evening, over a candlelit table filled with dishes I'd prepared and paid for, I heard something that broke me in ways I never imagined. This isn't just a story of humiliation. It's a story of awakening. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, this story is for you. Make sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know your story too. I still remember the soft clink of crystal glasses, the warm saxophone melody floating through the modern apartment in Seattle I'd worked my entire life to build. The aroma of rosemary and lemon lamb roast I'd seasoned that morning slow cooking while I ran errands for a dinner I wasn't even invited to. But I was there because Lydia had once again forgotten to mention that her parents would be visiting, and the house needed to look picture perfect. I should have known better. I should have recognized the warning in her mother's tight, polite smile, the kind that looks through you rather than at you, before she asked in that sugary, cutting tone, "And you are?" Lydia didn't hesitate. She let out a careless laugh, like it was the easiest joke in the world. "Oh, that's Celeste," she said lightly. "Our unofficial house manager. She keeps this place running." Everyone laughed. Even my son Aaron. I just stood there, holding the bottle of Merlot I'd brought up from the wine rack downstairs. I smiled as if my chest were collapsing in slow motion, as if I couldn't feel the tiles shifting beneath my feet. I quietly placed the bottle on the counter and walked down the long hallway lined with family photos I'd framed myself. Their laughter followed me bright and cruel, echoing down the corridor like a song I couldn't turn off. Not one of them, not even my own child, corrected her. Not one said, "That's my mother." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the pale blue door I'd painted with my own hands the year we moved in. I remembered the day I signed those loan papers at the bank, believing I was building a haven, not a house, where I'd someday feel like a guest with chores, my name, my credit, my down payment. Aaron had just graduated college. Lydia wasn't even in the picture yet. They had nothing. I gave them everything. And now I was the help. The next morning, I made coffee like I always did. I fed Mochi, the cat Lydia pretended to adore, for Instagram photos. And when she came downstairs in her silk workout set, too busy scrolling on her phone to even mumble a greeting, I just waited. She finally looked up, eyebrows lifting with impatient confusion. I handed her the keys, all of them. The front gate, the garage remote, the mailbox, even the spare key I'd kept hidden behind the flower pot for years. "What's this?" she asked, her perfectly shaped brows narrowing. I smiled. "Good luck paying the mortgage now." She blinked. "What?" I walked past her, down the long hallway lined with travel photos I'd framed, the antique furniture I'd restored, the walls I'd painted with my own hands. I didn't take anything, just my worn leather purse and the coat I'd worn the day I brought Aaron home from the hospital. I didn't say goodbye. I heard Aaron's voice calling my name as I opened the door, but I didn't stop. He ran after me, barefoot on the cold driveway, his voice cracking, but I kept walking. I didn't slam the door of the car. I closed it softly, deliberately, because something inside me had broken, but not in the way you think. It wasn't rage. It wasn't grief. It was clarity. And clarity is the quietest thing in the world. It doesn't shout. It doesn't plead. It just knows. And I knew finally, deeply, that I was done. I didn't know exactly where I was headed, but I knew where I would never stay again. The last thing I saw in the rearview mirror was Aaron standing in the driveway, barefoot and bewildered, realizing too late how much he'd just lost. And neither did I yet. They say you don't realize you're drowning until you finally breathe. That first night, in the tiny seaside apartment my great-aunt May left me, it didn't feel like freedom. Not yet. It felt like silence, thick, heavy silence that settled like dust on everything. The place smelled like old wood and forgotten stories, with faded mint wallpaper and a heater that sighed like an old man remembering winter after winter. It was addressed to me in May's familiar cursive, dated nearly 30 years ago. "If you're reading this, it means you've come back. And I'm sorry you had to." My pulse quickened as I unfolded the delicate, yellowed pages. The paper felt as thin as memory itself, Inside were copies of medical records, handwritten notes, and a single faded photograph a newborn swaddled in a striped hospital blanket. But it wasn't Aaron. There was a name typed neatly beneath it, Noah Callahan. I read the letter once, then again, then a third time before the words truly sank in. May had been a maternity nurse at the hospital where I'd given birth. She wrote that she'd always had doubts she'd noticed something off in the nursery that night, a last-minute room reassignment, confusion with the ID tags on the bassinets. By the time she questioned it, the babies were already home. She never told me. Said she was terrified to speak up, said she prayed she was wrong. But years later, while sorting old files, she found a confidential settlement, a quiet payout from the hospital to another family. That's when she knew Aaron wasn't my son. My hands shook so hard I thought I'd drop the papers. I stared at the photo again. The name, Noah Callahan. My mind refused to believe it, because if that was true, then who was Aaron? Who was I to him? And then something strange happened. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt free. Not because I didn't love him, but because for the first time in decades, the dissonance made sense. All those years of trying and failing to connect, all those cold silences and distant eyes. Maybe it wasn't in my head. Maybe he really had felt like a stranger. Maybe I wasn't losing my mind after all. I spent the rest of the night reading every page from that dusty trunk. May had kept everything: DNA confirmations, notarized affidavits, even a clipped newspaper article about the Callahan family. They were well off, educated, still living here in Port Brighton, just a few miles from where I'd raised Aaron. My real son had been here all along, growing up beneath the same skyline. I folded the letters carefully, slid them into a fresh envelope, and tucked it inside my nightstand drawer. Then I turned toward the mirror and stared at the reflection that met me. I didn't recognize her, but for the first time in years, I wasn't ashamed of the woman looking back. She was broken. Yes, but she was awakening, and the world had no idea what that meant yet. There's a kind of silence that doesn't soothe. It punishes. That was the silence I lived in for weeks after reading Aunt May's letter. I didn't know what to do with what I'd learned. I carried it inside me like a live wire, too dangerous to touch, impossible to forget. I didn't call Aaron. I didn't go searching for Noah. I just existed. Each morning, I'd brew a single cup of coffee, stare through the fogged window of that seaside apartment, and try to understand who I was now. The Celeste who raised Aaron wasn't the same woman who sat there holding those pages. That Celeste had been a mother, a wife once, a giver, a caretaker of everyone but herself. But who was I without those titles? One cold evening, the radiator gave out. I lit a lavender-scented candle, wrapped myself in 2 old quilts, and curled up on the couch with the hospital files spread across my knees. I must have read them 100 times, every name, date, and signature. Checked out. It was real. My real son, Noah Callahan, was born on the same night as Aaron, in the same wing of that hospital that would later bury the mistake under settlement papers and silence. May had kept everything. She'd known the truth would one day need to surface, and now she'd left it for me, the puzzle pieces of a stolen life. I felt grief, but not for Aaron. I grieved for the stolen years, the birthday candles I never lit for Noah, the scraped knees I never kissed, the school projects and Christmas mornings that had belonged to someone else. All those moments I thought I was giving to my child. They had always belonged to another boy, and yet I didn't hate Aaron. My love for him had never been about blood. It had been instinct, devotion, habit, unconditional. Or so I thought. But when someone you raise won't defend, you won't even see you, it forces you to question everything. It was a gray Tuesday afternoon when I finally stood up, brushed the dust from my skirt, and decided I'd hidden long enough. I wasn't ready to face Aaron. Not yet. But I could start somewhere small, somewhere quiet. I walked into Port Brighton's Old Town District and stopped across the street from a little shop tucked between a florist and a cafe. The sign read, Callahan's Books. It was painted a deep forest green, the letters on the windows hand-drawn in gold leaf paint, charmingly uneven. I must have walked past it a dozen times before and never really seen it. He was there. Noah. I didn't need anyone to tell me. He looked to be around 31, maybe a little older. Clean-shaven, thoughtful eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. He was helping a young woman find a collection of poetry, his voice calm, deliberate, full of quiet confidence. There was something about his posture, gentle yet certain, that hit me harder than I expected. I stood there across the street, my hands clutching my coat, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out traffic, and I cried, not loudly, not with sobs, just soft, relentless tears that rolled down into the collar of my wool coat. I didn't go inside. Not that day. I just watched, and then I did it again the next day, and the next. It became a kind of ritual. I'd walk that block every morning, sit on the weathered bench near the bakery, pretend to scroll through my phone or sip coffee from a paper cup, and just watch Noah living the life I'd never been a part of. It wasn't obsession. It was mourning and preparation, because little by little, I was beginning to piece things together. While I sat outside that bookstore, I noticed patterns: the delivery schedule, the customers who came regularly, the cadence of the shop's opening and closing. I was observing, yes, but not just him. Also Aaron and Lydia. They still lived barely 15 minutes away. And thanks to Lydia's constant social media updates, I didn't even need to ask questions. Her feed was a trail of breadcrumbs, brunch spots tagged with hashtag self-care Sundays, yoga retreats, vineyard photos with rented bottles. They weren't struggling. They were pretending. Lydia's so-called mindset coaching business was smoke and mirrors, rented offices, bought followers, and maxed out credit cards, keeping the illusion alive. And Aaron, he had quietly quit his accounting job 6 months earlier. Lydia called it manifesting a new chapter. I called it self-destruction, with pretty captions. Noah rang it up himself. Excellent choice, he said with a small, genuine smile. Hard to come by these days. His voice was warm, familiar in a way that made something deep in my chest tighten. He handed me the paper bag, his fingers brushing mine for the briefest second. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. You own this place? Sort of, he said with an easy shrug. My parents helped me get started. They're retired now, so I manage it full-time. Keeps me grounded. Of course they helped. Of course he had support. Not like Aaron, who had nothing but my sweat, sacrifice, and borrowed hope, and who'd turned all that devotion into a punchline. Noah had parents but not me. And Aaron had me but never wanted what I gave. The universe had scrambled the pieces, and we were all bleeding over the wrong corners of the same puzzle. I began stopping by the bookstore every few days, casual but deliberate. Sometimes I bought a novel or a used journal. Sometimes I just browsed the shelves like any other local. Noah started to recognize me. Back again, huh? He'd say, that easy grin lighting his face. We made small talk. The weather, a new author's debut, local art fairs. I never told him my name. Not yet. It wasn't time. Meanwhile, in the shadows of my old life, the ground was shifting. Aaron sent one message, just one. Mom, are you okay? 3 weeks of silence, and that was all. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say, but I started digging deeper. The house deed still in my name. Lydia had tried to refinance behind my back. Denied. She couldn't afford the payments. Aaron had no job. I could have filed the papers and evicted them overnight. But that would have been mercy. No. I wanted them to feel the slow unraveling, the fear that creeps in when you realize the ground beneath you doesn't belong to you. It belongs to someone else. To me. Each night I wrote, my new journal became a record of everything, every receipt, every snippet of conversation, every time Noah mentioned a favorite author or a book from his childhood. Not to use against him, but to understand him. To know the son I'd never gotten to raise. And somewhere between the ink and the quiet, the truth came into focus sharper than it ever had before. Aaron didn't treat me cruelly because he was switched at birth. He treated me cruelly because he chose to, because Lydia gave him permission to, because somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing me as a person worth respecting and started seeing me as someone he could simply dismiss. But Noah, he didn't know me at all, and still, in just 5 minutes, he showed me more kindness, patience, and humanity than Aaron had in 5 years. I wasn't ready to tell him the truth. Not yet, but I could feel it coming closer, like a tide inching higher on the shore. When that moment arrived, I wouldn't just tell him who I was, I would tell him everything. About the hospital, the night of the switch, the life that had been quietly stolen from both of us. But first, I needed to finish watching the old world burn, the one I had already walked away from, because once the last piece of that life crumbled, there would be nothing left to look back at. I never planned to become a ghost in my own story, but sometimes, the only way to see people for who they really are is to step out of their light. After that last day in the bookstore, something shifted in me, not like a storm, sudden and violent, but like a slow sunrise spreading across a frostbitten field, quiet, unstoppable. I didn't rush. I wasn't chasing reunion anymore. I was reclaiming myself. My posture straightened, my voice steadied. I walked taller, thought sharper. I bought a second-hand laptop from a pawn shop and began typing my notes, turning scribbled thoughts into digital files, evidence, timelines, and names. This wasn't a diary anymore. It was strategy. It was survival. And one thing became crystal clear. Aaron and Lydia's life was a fraud held together by duct tape and delusion. The house they lived in, my house, was still legally mine. Lydia's glittering brand, Lydia Elevate, was nothing but a tower of filters and buzzwords, fake clients, fabricated testimonials, rented luxury. She built an empire of illusion, selling self-worth while drowning in self-debt. I dug through the LLC registration, the tax filings, the credit histories. Every photo, every event, every word she shared online was performance. Behind the ring light and curated smiles, there was nothing but debt, maxed out cards, defaulted private loans, Aaron's student debt still unpaid. Their life was a mirror with cracks too deep to polish, and I was done being the reflection they leaned on to hide them. They were drowning under a mountain of unpaid bills, but too vain, or too stubborn to admit it. Maybe both. That's when I realized something simple but absolute. If I pulled just one string, their whole world would collapse. But I didn't, not yet, because there was one more step I needed to take first. Noah. I still visited the bookstore, and he still didn't know who I was, but with each quiet conversation, a little more of my fear dissolved. We talked about books, about life, about ordinary things, new TV shows, the best coffee spots in town, the way the city hums at night. Once, we sat together at the tiny cafe next door, steam curling from our mugs as rain tapped against the window. He told me how he'd almost become a teacher once, but his love for stories had pulled him toward owning a bookstore instead. You remind me of someone, he said, tilting his head, a faint smile on his lips. Someone I can't quite place. I smiled back. Maybe a librarian. He laughed. Maybe. That moment stayed with me for days. I didn't just like him. I recognized him. Not from the file May had left behind, or the photo tucked in her letter, but in the way he moved through the world. In his gentleness, in his calm listening, in the quiet strength that didn't need to be loud to be sure. It was familiar. It was mine. I started dreaming again, dreams of the life we never had, of baking cookies together on a Sunday afternoon, of sitting in the bleachers at youth soccer games, of birthday candles and scraped knees and laughter echoing through a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon. I could see it so clearly it made my chest ache, but the past was closed, and I couldn't step back into it. So I turned forward and planned what came next. The first thing I did was call a lawyer, not for revenge, for justice. The house was still legally mine. The down payment, the mortgage, the taxes, I had paid it all. Aaron had promised, "We'll transfer it to your name later." There was never a rush, he'd said. Of course there wasn't. I was paying for everything. Now, I wanted my name back, my rights, my home. If not physically, then legally. I met with an attorney downtown, a woman about my age, sharp-eyed, composed, with a kindness that didn't dilute her confidence. She listened without judgment, her pen gliding steadily across a notepad as I spoke. When I finished, she leaned back and said softly, "We'll file the motion this week." I signed the papers with a steady hand. That evening, I walked past the house that once defined me, its windows glowing with a life that no longer belonged to me. The porch light glowed softly against the twilight. Lydia was sitting on the swing, scrolling through her phone, a half-full glass of white wine balanced on her knee. Inside, Aaron sat slouched on the couch, headphones on, eyes fixed on the blue glow of a video game screen. Their lives were running on autopilot, no awareness that the ground beneath them was already shifting, quietly giving way. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about restoring balance. And when the house finally sold, they'd know what it felt like to be powerless. To feel the world you built slip from your hands without warning. And maybe, just maybe, they'd understand what it meant to be discarded. I didn't slam any doors. I didn't shout. I just watched, waited, and walked away. The first domino had fallen and none of them even knew it yet. I've always believed silence holds more power than noise, that real strength isn't in how loud you fight, but in how deeply you know you're right. The day the official notice went out to Aaron and Lydia, I was sitting in a quiet cafe near the courthouse, stirring honey into my chamomile tea with a calm I hadn't felt in years. My lawyer had said they'd receive it by a.m. sharp. At T9:07, my phone buzzed. Aaron. I stared at the screen until the call stopped ringing. Then I flipped the phone face down on the table and let the silence answer for me. It wasn't that I didn't want to hear his voice. I just wasn't ready to hear him lie. Later that afternoon, I opened my email. His message wasn't long. Mom, what are you doing? Please call me. Lydia is freaking out. Of course she was. The mortgage was due, and now they couldn't refinance because the woman they'd written off as harmless and irrelevant was the one holding the deed in her name, and they never saw it coming. A week later, another call. Lydia this time. I didn't answer her either. She left a voicemail, her voice tight, forced calm unraveling beneath the surface. Celeste, we really need to talk. This is just a misunderstanding. Aaron says you're going through something, and we're here to support you, but you're putting our lives at risk. That's not fair. I listened twice. She called the house hers, and my silence, it sharpened. It became deliberate, heavy, intentional. They didn't understand yet, but they would. 2 days later, Aaron showed up at my apartment. I saw him through the peephole before he even knocked. Aaron, hair unkempt, shadows under his eyes, a man unraveling, a man who'd finally begun to feel what I'd carried for years. I didn't open the door. He stood there for a long time, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, knocked once, then again. Mom, please don't do this. His voice was small, cracked. I stood on the other side, my hand resting on the doorknob, but I didn't turn it. I let him sit in the discomfort of being unheard, the same silence he'd let swallow me for so long. The following week, my lawyer finalized the paperwork to list the house for sale. Every cent, legally, ethically, emotionally, was mine. Lydia tried to fight it, of course. She claimed contribution of value. My lawyer smiled and said, let's see her prove that in court. She couldn't, because she had never invested in anything but appearances, and now, those appearances were collapsing, one filter at a time. Word spread fast. Her curated world began to crumble. Her parents stopped leaving comments on her posts. Her clients quietly unfollowed. Brand deals disappeared. She posted a teary video, rambling about the injustice of generational property laws. People saw through it, and I didn't post a single thing. I didn't need to. Silence was my language now. Instead, I went to Callahan's books. Noah and I had coffee again, talking about an old novel we both loved. He recommended a memoir. It's about grief, but also forgiveness, he said softly. Stirring his tea, I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I think you'd like it, he added with that quiet smile. Maybe I would, I said. But not yet, because I wasn't done grieving or forgiving. At home, I began boxing up old photographs, baby pictures of Aaron, school portraits, birthday parties I'd planned and cleaned up alone. I didn't throw them away. I just put them aside, because the woman who'd spent her life giving everything, she was gone. And the woman who'd taken her place, she wasn't angry, she was awake. The papers were signed, the house was officially on the market, and somewhere across town. Inside that green-painted bookstore, my real son laughed at something a customer said, his voice full of light. He had no idea that his life was about to change too, but in the best way, because not all losses are tragedies, some of them are beginnings in disguise. I always thought masks belonged at costume parties, but Isabella wore hers like second skin, flawless, always smiling, unshakable. The kind of woman who knew exactly how to pose for a photo and angle a voice for maximum effect. But masks crack eventually. I was about to shatter hers. The idea came to me one gray morning while I was flipping through the local business directory. I'd already collected enough dirt credit problems, fake partnerships, missed mortgage notices, but I wanted proof. Something solid they couldn't spin away. So I hired a local business consultant, Gavin Quiet, professional, utterly discreet. I told him I needed a thorough audit. Nothing illegal, just a private deep dive into a company's structure. I gave him the name, Isabella Ascends LLC. A week later, he returned with a neat folder. What he'd found even surprised me. Isabella's whole business was a house of cards. No tax filings for recent quarters, forged invoices that looked real but pointed to clients who didn't exist, staged photo shoots at rented homes masquerading as makeovers, and so-called partnerships that were nothing but affiliate links with blown-up metrics. She wasn't only pretending to be successful, she was deceiving everyone. I asked Gavin, would this hold up under scrutiny? He met my eyes and said, if this goes public, she's finished financially and professionally. That was the moment I made a choice. I printed every page. Then I tracked down Isabella's parents' address, the same people who'd once clinked wine glasses in my kitchen while their daughter humiliated me. I mailed them the file anonymously. No signature, no explanation, just a plain note on top. Everything you think you know is a performance. 2 days later, the first cracks began to show. Lydia's Instagram went quiet. No stories, no sunrise routines, no coffee cup affirmations. Her latest post, a glossy quote about being misunderstood, was suddenly flooded with comments that weren't so kind. Then, like dominoes, her perfect world began to unravel. Her website went under maintenance. Her next wellness retreat was abruptly postponed due to unforeseen circumstances. And then came the real treat, news from an old neighbor who still followed her every move online. Apparently, Lydia's mother had been seen leaving their house in a rage on the phone, yelling, face flushed, purse swinging like a weapon. Whatever happened inside that house wasn't filtered, branded, or curated. It was raw and real. That night, Aaron called again. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. Mom, I don't know what's happening. Lydia's parents aren't speaking to us. Someone sent them something. Documents. They think we faked them. Did you? Did you do this? I didn't reply. He was finally seeing her for who she truly was and seeing himself for what he'd allowed her to make him. He had spent years defending a woman who burned everything she touched, starting with me. Let him sit in it. Let him finally feel it. That night, I walked to Callahan's Books again. Noah was closing up, the bell over the door giving a soft chime as I approached. He waved when he saw me. Back again? He said with a grin, unlocking the door. You should just work here at this point. I smiled. Maybe I should. We ended up sitting on the floor, surrounded by piles of paperbacks and cardboard boxes from a new shipment. He was cataloging, focused, careful with every book he touched. I started helping without being asked, matching titles to spreadsheets, sliding spines onto shelves. After a while, he looked up. Why do you come here? He asked softly, not accusing, just curious. The question caught me off guard. I met his eyes. My eyes, I hadn't noticed it before. The shape, the quiet steadiness. I like the way it feels in here, I said finally. Like nothing's pretending to be something it's not. He tilted his head, thinking, then smiled faintly. Yeah, he said. Me too. We worked in silence after that. No small talk, no explanations. But in that quiet, something shifted. Not truth, not yet, but something. Close, a thread quietly stitching its way between us. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost haunting someone else's story. I felt seen. The woman who once stood invisible in her own kitchen, she was gone. In her place stood someone they never expected, someone they never should have underestimated. I used to think heartbreak arrived like thunder, one violent moment, one decisive break, but it doesn't. Not always. Sometimes it comes slowly, like water leaking through a ceiling, drop by drop, until one day the whole thing collapses. And Aaron, he was finally standing under the flood. By then, the news had reached him. The house was officially listed for sale. Lydia's mask had shattered, her business exposed, her reputation unraveling thread by thread, and with nowhere else left to point the blame. Aaron did what he always did. He came running to me. I heard the knock before I saw him. It was a quiet afternoon. I was just finishing my cup of jasmine tea when the sound echoed through the apartment. 3 soft knocks, hesitant, uncertain, like someone who didn't know if the door would open or slam in his face. I opened it slowly. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, unshaven, eyes hollow, thinner than I remembered. His shirt was wrinkled, like he'd pulled it off the floor on his way out the door. "Mom," he said, voice cracking. "Can I come in?" I didn't answer. I just stepped aside. He walked in and stood in the center of the room, hands twitching, like he didn't know where to put them, or himself. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he broke. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "To us?" I almost laughed. "Us?" I repeated softly, as if there's been an us for years. I sank into the armchair across from him, calm, deliberate. "I'm not doing anything to you, Aaron," I said quietly. "I'm doing something for me." His jaw tightened. "You're selling the house. My house. I grew up there. And you just gave it away." I met his eyes. "No, Aaron," I said. "You gave it away. You let Lydia turn me into your maid. You watched it happen. You laughed, and you never ever apologized." He didn't deny it. He just stared at the floor, shoulders slumped, voice barely audible. "I thought you were just being dramatic," he murmured. "I didn't know it hurt you like that." I stared at him for a long time. "That's the problem, Aaron," I said quietly. "You never cared enough to know what hurt me. You just assumed I'd always be there cleaning up your messes, paying your bills, smiling while you let that woman chip away at who I was." He flinched. "Lydia's not who I thought she was." I didn't move. "That's not news to me." He finally looked up. His eyes were glassy now, unfocused. "I lost everything," he whispered. I didn't blink. "No, you gave it away." Silence filled the room, thick, electric, unrelenting. "I miss you," he said softly. I sat a little straighter. "I raised you," I said. "Fed you, clothed you, gave up everything I had for you. And you let me be humiliated in the house I bought with my own hands and my own money." His lip trembled. "I thought she was helping me. I thought we were building something." "You were," I said. "You built a lie, and now it's falling apart." He stood then, pacing the small living room, his voice rising in desperation. "So, that's it? You're just going to walk away?" I stood, calm and steady. I walked to the drawer beside the kitchen counter and pulled out the cream-colored envelope Aunt May left me. I turned it in my hands before looking at him. "I'm going to tell you something now," I said. "And I need you to listen. Really, listen." He nodded, hesitant, confused. I handed him the envelope. "These are your birth records. Read them." He sank into the chair, fingers trembling as he opened it. He flipped through the documents, the letter, the hospital files, the DNA report May had quietly ordered years after the fact. His brow furrowed, then fell. He read in silence, then he looked up, eyes wide and wet. This can't be real." "It is. You're saying I'm not your son?" "I'm saying you weren't born to me," I said evenly, "but I raised you as if you were. I gave you every piece of me, even when you threw it away." He went pale. "So who's your real son?" I didn't answer. I just watched. The realization settled over him. He sat there, slack-jawed, the papers shaking in his hands. "I don't know who I am anymore," he whispered. "Now you know how I felt," I said softly. "For years." He didn't cry, not really, but something inside him cracked, and I saw it happen, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with peace, because I had finally said what needed to be said. I walked him to the door. He turned back, eyes pleading. "Can we fix this?" I met his gaze and shook my head. "I don't know," I said, "but it's not my job to try anymore." And I closed the door gently behind him, not with anger, not with spite, but with finality, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one holding it open. It took me 3 days to decide how I was going to do it. I practiced the conversation everywhere in front of the mirror. In the car, even standing in line at the grocery store, my fingers gripping a basket of oranges, whispering words I could barely finish. I'm your mother, there was a mistake, you've lived a life that wasn't meant to be yours. And so have I, but nothing sounded right. Because how do you drop a truth like that into someone's life and expect them to survive the impact? Still, I had to try. Noah was in the bookstore, like always. The late afternoon light spilled through the windows in soft golden beams, casting warm halos on the bookshelves and scattering long shadows across the hardwood floor. It felt sacred somehow, a place where truth might finally belong. When he looked up and smiled, I almost turned and walked away, but I didn't. Hey, he said. You came at the right time, we just got a new batch of rare poetry editions. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Actually, I said quietly, I came to talk. He studied me, brow furrowing slightly, sensing something in my voice. Sure, he said. Come on back. He led me through the side door into a small break room, a kettle on the counter, a mismatched couch, a chipped table. Real life. No filters. We sat. I've been coming here for a reason, I began, twisting my hands together. I figured, he said softly. You're not exactly here for the books, are you? A small, sad laugh escaped me. No, I said. I'm not. Then I reached into my bag and took out the envelope the letter May had written, the birth records, the DNA proof, and I placed it on the table between us. He looked at it, then back at me, his expression careful. What's this? He asked. Something that's going to change everything. He waited, eyes steady, and I felt my voice falter as I began. 30 years ago, I said, there was a mistake at the hospital. 2 babies were switched at birth. His eyebrows drew together, confusion shadowing his face. My son, I whispered, was given to another family. He went completely still. And theirs, I said, my throat tightening, was given to me. He didn't speak, not right away. The silence stretched between us, thick, fragile, infinite, as if the world itself had paused, holding its breath for what would come next. I raised him, I continued, my voice trembling. Loved him with everything I had. But he never really loved me back. Noah's eyes searched mine, slowly connecting the pieces I wasn't saying aloud. You think I know you are. He looked down at the envelope, his hands trembling as he lifted it. Inside were the documents, the timeline, the medical files, May's letter with her quiet confession. He read in silence, every second stretched into forever. When he finished, he didn't look at me right away. He just set the papers down gently, his fingertips still resting on the edges. Like he needed to hold on to something solid. This is a lot, he said finally. I know. He swallowed hard. And you're Celeste? Yes. He looked up. His eyes were glassy, searching. I don't feel anything, he admitted. Not yet. You don't have to, I said softly. I'm not here to ask for a place in your life. I just needed you to know. He nodded slowly. Why no? Because I couldn't live with the silence anymore, I said. Because the truth deserved to breathe. He leaned back, exhaling a long, unsteady breath. I have parents, he said quietly. They raised me well. I know, I said. And I love that. I would never ask you not to love them. We sat there in that tiny room, surrounded by the smell of old paper and peppermint tea, the walls lined with stories written by other people who had once been lost too. And for the first time in years, I felt something like relief, not joy, not closure. Just the freedom of no longer carrying a truth alone. After a while he stood, pacing slowly, the envelope still on the table between us. I don't know what to do with this, he said honestly. I don't either, I replied. But I don't hate you. Tears welled in my eyes. That's more than I expected. He turned to me again, his expression softening, a quiet understanding settling between us. You didn't have to come, he said. I didn't know how. Not to, I whispered. He nodded. Then, can we take it slow? I don't want to make this something it's not. I wouldn't ask for anything else. He gave a small, fragile smile. You want to stay for tea? I smiled back. I'd love to. We didn't talk about the files again that afternoon. We talked about books and the weather and how he hated the sound of wind chimes but loved the rain. And as the light faded through the window, I realized that sometimes the truth doesn't destroy what's left. Sometimes it simply sets it free. And though the past still sat between us unopened, raw, fragile as old paper, we had started something. Not a relationship, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, a beginning. By the time autumn settled over Port Brighton, the leaves weren't the only things changing. The house sold faster than I ever expected. Full asking price, more than I dared to imagine. Aaron and Lydia were given 30 days to vacate. No extensions. No negotiations. I didn't evict them out of bitterness. I did it out of necessity, because that house had been my prison for too long. Watching them pack their curated lives, box by box, knowing every pillow, every plant, every polished trinket had been bought on borrowed time. It felt like watching a stage set being torn down after the final act. The play was over, the illusion gone. The day the moving truck came, I drove past. I didn't stop. I didn't roll down the window. I just watched from a distance as Lydia barked orders at the movers, her oversized sunglasses shielding whatever was left of her pride, while Aaron stood on the lawn, phone pressed to his ear, pacing in slow, helpless circles. I wondered if he'd ever imagined this day, if he'd ever thought I would be the one to bring it. Their fall wasn't loud. There were no screaming matches, no headlines, no dramatic unraveling, but it was complete. Lydia's parents pulled their financial support. Her wellness brand lost every major partnership. Her perfect online image became the subject of quiet whispers in the corners of town. The woman who once laughed at me in my own kitchen can't afford her luxury skincare line or her daily matcha ritual anymore. Aaron tried to get a job, any job, but with no degree, no work record, and no recommendations worth calling back. The doors stayed closed. He ended up renting a small apartment on the edge of the city. My lawyer mentioned it in passing. I didn't ask, but I also didn't celebrate, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about consequences finally finding their way home. Meanwhile, my own life was quietly becoming something new. Noah and I continued to meet, always casually. Coffee, book discussions, articles shared over lunch, little comments about life, about the world, about the comfort of small, honest moments. And every time I left that bookstore, I felt a little lighter, a little more alive. He asked about my writing once. I told him I'd started working on a memoir, that I had a story to tell, even if no one ever read it. He smiled and said, "You should. Stories like that matter." He still didn't call me mom, and I didn't expect him to. That wasn't the point. We were building something not out of guilt, not out of blood, but out of choice, and that made all the difference. One bright Saturday, we walked through the Port Brighton farmers market together. He picked up a jar of apple butter and laughed softly. "My mom used to make this every fall." Something about the way he said "my mom," it didn't sting. It felt right, because he had a mother. And I had a son, one who never truly saw me until it was too late. Some nights, I'd sit alone with my tea, wondering if Aaron was sleeping on a mattress or a floor, if Lydia still wore her silk robes, if they looked at each other now and finally saw the things they'd ignored before. I didn't miss them. I missed the idea of what we were supposed to be. But grief like that, it's a shadow. It fades, little by little, and in its place grows something stronger. Pride, the kind that comes when you finally learn to love yourself more than you loved their approval. Before the sale officially closed, I walked through my old neighborhood one last time, not to haunt it, just to say goodbye. I passed the school where Aaron used to attend, the park where I'd pushed him on swings, the grocery store where I'd counted coupons to buy his favorite cereal, and I let it all go, because I had given everything I had to a family that never gave back, and now I was giving to someone who might never call me mom, but still looked at me with kindness, with curiosity, with respect. Sometimes, you don't need redemption. You just need peace. And for the first time, I was beginning to feel it. It was early November when the text came from Aaron. Just one line, "Can we meet?" Just once. I stared at it for a long time. It had been weeks since I'd seen him, weeks of silence heavy enough to feel like gravity itself, but something in his tone was different this time, not angry, not desperate, not accusing, just human. It sounded like surrender, not defeat, just the quiet acceptance that comes after a long, exhausting war. We met at a small park on the edge of Port Brighton, the kind with rusted benches, a cracked walking path, and a pond that hadn't held water in years. I'd chosen it because it was neutral ground, no memories, no ghosts. He was already there when I arrived, sitting hunched forward, hands clasped between his knees. When he looked up, for just a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, awkward, uncertain, waiting for someone to tell him what to do next. I sat down beside him, careful to leave space between us. He cleared his throat. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said quietly. I nodded, saying nothing. I wanted to understand. I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope, the one that had followed me through every stage of this truth. May's letter, the records, the DNA results. I handed it to him without a word. He didn't open it, just held it in his lap like something sacred or cursed. "I did a test of my own," he said after a long pause. "After you told me." "Same result." I nodded again. "I spent weeks trying to figure out what to do with it," he continued, voice low. "And I kept thinking, if I wasn't your son, then what was I?" I looked at him then, really looked, the man who'd once been my baby, my burden, my heartbreak. "You were my child," I said softly. "But I treated you like I know how you treated me," he interrupted. He winced as soon as he said it. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he added quickly. "I don't deserve it." "You don't," I said plainly. He looked away, swallowing hard. "But that doesn't mean I hate you." He turned back to me, eyes wet, searching. "Then what does it mean?" "It means," I said, my voice steady, "that I finally love myself more than I love the idea of you." The silence that followed was thick with understanding, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. He bowed his head, his breath clouding in the cold November air. "I thought I was protecting Lydia," he said finally, "standing by her. But I was just hiding behind her, wasn't I?" I nodded slowly. "You let her rewrite the story," I said. "And you handed her the pen." His shoulders slumped. "I wish I could undo it." "You can't," I said gently. "But you can stop pretending it didn't happen." We sat there in silence for a while, two people who had shared a life built on a lie, quietly unraveling it together in the brittle autumn light. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I hope he's good to you." I looked at him, startled. "Who?" "Noah," he said. "Your son." A breath caught in my throat. The wind rustled through the dry grass between us, carrying the sound of his words farther than either of us could reach. "He's kind," I said quietly. "Gentle." Aaron gave a faint smile. "Then I guess some of that came from you." We both laughed softly, tiredly, not with joy, but not with bitterness either. "I don't want to be in your life if it hurts you," he said finally, "but if there's ever a place for me, just a corner of it." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. I stood and looked out at the pond, its surface scattered with leaves drifting like ashes. "I'll think about it," I said. He nodded. "That's more than I hoped for." As I turned to leave, I placed a hand on his shoulder for just a second, a brief, quiet mercy, and that was it. The final moment, not closure, understanding. And somehow, that was enough, because I didn't need to fix him anymore, and I didn't need to be fixed either. I just needed to be free, and I was. I really, truly was. I used to think the word freedom was too big, too grand, too distant. Something reserved for flags and speeches, not for someone like me. But that morning, when I turned the key in the front door of Noah's bookstore, I finally understood what it meant. He had called me the night before, said he had something to show me. His voice had been casual, but there'd been a quiet weight beneath it, something waiting to unfold. When I walked in, he was standing by the back wall where a new wooden sign hung above an arched doorway. "The next chapter." I smiled. "What's this?" He handed me a single brass key, small, simple, polished from use. "It's a new section I'm opening," he said. "A cozy reading space. Coffee corner. Maybe community talks." He looked around, then back at me. "I wanted it to feel like more than just a store," he said softly. "I wanted it to feel like belonging." I turned the key over in my hand, the metal warm against my palm. "And you want me to open it?" I asked. He met my gaze. I'm serious now. I want you to have it. I stared at him, the world narrowing to that one quiet moment. He went on, his voice low, steady. You gave someone your whole life, he said. They treated you like furniture, like background noise. He took a breath. But I see you. I don't need you to prove anything. You've done enough. Tears welled in my eyes, soft and unstoppable. I blinked them back, whispering, "You don't have to do this." "I know," he said gently, "but I want to." I stood there, holding that key, the weight of it real and solid in my hand, and for the first time in decades, it didn't feel like I was opening a door for someone else. It felt like I was finally opening one for me. I walked toward the door beneath the sign and slid the brass key into the lock. It turned smoothly, like it had been waiting for me. Inside, warm light filtered through the tall windows, dust motes dancing like gold in the air. Shelves lined the walls, already half-stocked with classics and memoirs, spines whispering old stories. A soft rug lay in the center, a worn armchair, a small table with a tea set, delicate and waiting. It felt like a room from a dream I'd once had, and somehow forgotten. I turned around, completely undone. Noah smiled from the doorway. "Consider it yours," he said quietly. "For as long as you want it." I walked to the center of the room and stood still, breathing it in, the scent of new wood, paper, and possibility. That night, I sat in my apartment for the last time. The old notebook rested on my lap, its final page still blank. I picked up my pen and began to write. I was a woman who gave until I vanished. Then I became the woman who took it all back, not with rage, not with fire, but with silence, with truth, with the kind of strength they never saw coming. The next day, I finalized the donation. A portion of the house sale went to a foundation for women starting over, the dismissed, the discarded, the underestimated. Women like me. They called to thank me, but I didn't need thanks, because every time I stepped into that bookstore, into that little room under the sign that read, "The Next Chapter," I remembered who I was now. Not Aaron's mother, not Lydia's maid, Celeste Walker, woman, survivor, author of her own ending. I never needed permission to start again. Just a key, and now I had it in my hand. And this time, it didn't open someone else's door. It opened mine. Thank you for listening. I wrote at the end of my story. If you're watching this or reading this, and you've ever felt unseen, share your story. Your voice matters.